But now we'll turn our attention towards the NFL, Cincinnati Bengals, AFC North, and more. Austin Mock with The Athletic. Awesome enough to give us some time today. Austin, we appreciate your time. Happy Friday. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Look, obviously, this draft was very unique. We talked before the draft that I just felt like the build to this draft wasn't as hyped as it usually is, which is pretty ironic because it was probably one of the most talked about drafts in recent memory, at least. I mean, it was probably one of the most talked about drafts, especially in the back end of it. Obviously, Shador having a lot to do with that. But can you think of a more polarizing draft than the one that we just experienced this past weekend?
No, definitely not in recent memory. Like this one was, I think, head and shoulders in terms of like interest, engagement, whatever you want to label it as. I think it helped because the like picks 4 or 5 through like 20, you could have seen a wide range. All those players in that range were kind of lumped together there. But yeah, Shador kind of stole the attention or the headlines, I guess, with his drop. So yeah, there was just a lot of uncertainty. And then you add in a high-profile player like Shador dropping like he did, and you're going to get a draft that people can't really stop talking about.
I know you graded the entire league, but as a show based in Cincinnati, want to get some outside opinions on what the Bengals were able to do. Out of the 32 teams, you had the Bengals coming in at 25th with a D- on the draft. I think the Bengals have been a class specifically with a big discrepancy in what they've been graded. What impacted your grade specifically so heavily to give the Bengals a D-?
Yeah, so my grades are comprised of like 3 things here. I use our consensus board from the draft experts that we compile at The Athletic, and I compare that to where that player ranks compared to where they're drafted. That's one part of it. The other part of it is their position drafted, and then there's also trades, which wasn't as big of an issue here for Cincinnati.
Never is.
But so the big thing for that was position value. I thought was fine. They're in a unique spot that this also doesn't take in team fit outside of the quarterback position. So I just want to throw that out there as well. But they need a defense, right? Like that's what we saw that last year. They pretty much addressed that. 3 of the top 4 picks being on that side of the ball. But it just was one of those things where I think there wasn't a ton of options at their picks. And then on top of that, they reached for, I thought Demetrius Knight was a reach compared to our consensus board.
Yep.
And that's a big factor into, why they graded as low as they did. I think they did an all right job of kind of where they needed to go, but I think it was just more of definitely on the defense side of the ball, best player available, maybe go with that. And maybe they have Knight a lot higher than our consensus board, but based on our consensus board, that pick hurt them and probably tanked their draft grade for me.
You mentioned it right there. They might have had players such as Demetrius Knight, maybe even a Dylan Fairchild, much higher than the consensus boards. How much do these rankings take into account a team like the Bengals in their championship window right now, trying to draft players that can contribute immediately, as opposed to maybe players that are ranked higher but are more based on upside?
Yeah, so that's where it kind of gets difficult, and it's where everything these are. I don't want to say like my grades are better than anybody's or anything. Probably look at the composite of grades and you'll see where your team probably landed there. But that's not really factored in as much. I guess you could say that the consensus board that we're using is factoring that in a little bit, just from the standpoint of like, hey, I would assume from a draft grading perspective, you probably take a drop if you're not ready to play year one. Depending on the position, obviously, quarterback might be a little bit different. And just like it's different in every aspect when it comes to the NFL. But so I wouldn't say it's factored in that much, maybe a little bit on the consensus board side, but it's one of those tough things when you're a GM. That's why it's a very difficult job. And, there's only 32 of them is like, you have to balance that. And, hey, we're passing on a player that might be a stud in year 2, but we need success or, production in year 1. It's, you kind of do have to balance that. So that's where I do kind of think there's like a range of where these draft grades should be. And where like kind of taking a couple of people that you respect and seeing where they draft or grade the Bengals, probably the best way to get a real feel of probably where they land with this draft.
Sorry. You mentioned that the Bengals reached in the middle rounds of the draft, which negatively affected your grade, but probably the most contentious pick for Bengals fans was the first-round pick of Shamar Stewart, which was probably one of their closest picks to consensus boards. What is your take on the Shamar Stewart pick at 17? Was it as big of a risk as some Bengals fans are making it out to be?
I think it kind of goes back into production. I don't know if Stewart is going to be ready right away. He's one of the more raw players. He was more of the guy in college with he got a lot of pressures but didn't necessarily finish. And whether that's a technique development thing that Cincinnati's going to have to work through, who knows? But he was getting to the quarterback. He was forcing throws and forcing the quarterback to get rid of the ball, which is a pretty good predictor of success there. He's super athletic, so it's one of those things that that box is checked. You don't ever have to worry about that. It's just whether he can kind of put it all together. What that means for year one, I don't know. I think maybe it's more of a third down situational thing, where he's always on the field in that way. But I think his development over the next 5 months or so, 4 months, is going to be paramount to how much impact he has on those early downs with his ability to defend the run and not just be a situational only pass rusher.
Outside of Cincinnati, obviously the drafts across the rest of the division really impact the Bengals. The Browns, I saw, had your best grade at an A+. The Ravens and Steelers always seem to draft well. Ravens adding great value with Malachi Starks in the first round. Steelers getting Derek Harmon, who Bengals fans here wanted pretty bad at 17. Which player added, not even just in the first round, but throughout the whole drafts within the AFC North, do you think Bengals fans should be most afraid of going into next season?
Oh, that's a tough one. I want to say Mason Graham with the Browns, but I've been making this joke about the Browns with, even if they give up 17 points a game, they're going to be the inverse of what the Bengals were last year, and that the offense, it doesn't matter if you give up 17 points a game when you can't score 17. So I'd say he's probably the impact guy. He obviously, it's kind of a cop out. He was the highest ranked player, but he's just a guy that I think. I like it when guys go into a situation where there's already a star impacting his position. Obviously, Myles Garrett is on the edge. Mason Graham is going to be an interior defensive lineman, but it's not hey, here's the pressure of you got to go in and just start destroying stuff. He's going to have that benefit of the opposing offense is going to be factoring in where Myles Garrett is way before he is, so that kind of alleviates some pressure for him. And he was just super disruptive at Michigan for basically 3 years. Started as a true freshman at the end of the year. They were obviously very successful when he was there. I think he's just that interior guy that can play the run, stop the pass, and with Myles Garrett on the edge too. I just love that tandem and what that defensive line can do to opposing offenses within a division.
When you talk about Cleveland, obviously with Mason Graham, obviously they take with that fifth pick, with the Jaguars pick. Were you surprised that they traded back from 2, and did they get the better of that deal? Obviously, everyone thought for sure who they were going to go with at number 2. They opted not to, and they still get an impact player in Mason Graham there at number 5. Were you surprised that they traded that pick, and did they make the right decision to move from 2 to 5?
Yeah, if you would have asked me probably 2 months ago, I wouldn't have been that surprised. But we didn't hear any rumors of that, until I felt like it was 20 minutes before the draft started. So yeah, it definitely caught me by surprise because they were able to keep that under wraps. But yeah, I think they won the trade. That's why, honestly, I didn't think the rest of their draft was very good. I didn't really understand their process, but because they gained so much value, the way that I did the numbers in that trade, I think they got the equivalent of basically a top half of the first round draft pick with that trade with Jacksonville. So I think they won that. I think it's one of those things too. Travis Hunter, I'm not going to say he's overrated. He's a unicorn, but I think there probably is some concern if he can be a high level cornerback and wide receiver. So does that, some teams probably had his value a little bit lower. And yeah, Mason Graham was a top 5 player on the consensus board, and they got him at pick number 5. You cannot complain about that when you are adding in a, first round pick next year. So I think I think in that scope, they traded the pick and then drafted Graham. I thought it was good. The rest of the draft, I was a little confused about. I think they could have had even a higher distance away from my number 2 team because I still think that trade won them the draft, but I didn't love the rest of what they did.
The Dylan Gabriel pick, I think, kind of caught a lot of people's attention, and I think it even caught more people's attention when you took another quarterback later, and not just any quarterback, a quarterback that anyone thought could fall from, be taken in the first round or second. A lot of drama as far as like, okay, was that an ownership decision that kind of stepped into the Haslam step in and forced them to take, obviously Shador so late. I did see that the general manager for the Browns came out and Andrew Berry said, like, look, they obviously didn't plan on taking two quarterbacks in this draft, but when you have a first round caliber quarterback that drops to the fifth round, he looked at that as very good value. If the Browns don't take Shador in the fifth round or with that pick, how are you evaluating their draft out of the AFC North at this point?
Yeah, I think it's still pretty good. Like I said, that trade really won them in my, like, that really was what put them over the top. And it was such a, I think from the way that I did my process was it was going to be hard for them not to be in like the top 5 because of how much value is gained there. But yeah, Shador, I think it kind of saved that. The Gabriel one really confused me because outside of like, the fireworks and extracurriculars with Shador Sanders of, everything that comes with drafting him, like the knock on him was as a prospect, strictly on-field talent here was, really the arm strength and a little bit of his mobility. And then I just thought Dylan Gabriel in the third, just like he's similarly that type of player. And so I think they kind of counteract each other here with Gabriel and Sanders. Like, hey, you get a quote unquote steal in Sanders in the fifth, but the reach for Gabriel kind of like offset that to like a neutral play there for the Browns. So I didn't you had two running backs. I don't know if like there weren't enough premium positions there that I wish they would have went to the higher premium positions. But two quarterbacks, two running backs, it's just a little concerning for me of like what they did after, the first night where I think they kind of stole the show.
You can be a little harsher on the Browns. This guy's a Bengals fan that you're talking to. So when you take Dylan Gabriel and Shador Sanders, I'm surprised they didn't run it back with another quarterback after that. So they can take 6 quarterbacks, 7 quarterbacks. Once they reach that magic number of 100 within the last 3 decades, maybe then it'll start to work in Cleveland. Quick couple silly questions for you. Number one.
No offense.
No, of course, well, I don't have to say no offense because you're no longer a Browns fan. You're a Bengals fan now.
Yeah, there you go.
Your last name did you become a draft analyst because of your last name, or did you change your last name because you like doing mock drafts?
I was born with it. That's where I was. Honestly, I didn't do much draft stuff until a couple years ago. So that was, and I honestly didn't really have, like, I wasn't a like draft enthusiast even. I was more of just like, all right, let's see who the players are. Like I wasn't doing any like pre-draft, work and looking at prospects and stuff like that. So yeah, I just have that name fittingly. It's interesting because I'm like, okay, how can I tie my name into like if I do a mock draft or anything like that? But like it just ends up being 2 mocks, so it like doesn't really work. Like mock draft, it gets a little confusing there. But yeah, I do have the born with the name. I don't know if I was destined to be doing some NFL draft work when I was born, but yeah, here we are with the fitting name.
It's a perfect fit. You mentioned the Bengals defense, addressing that defense, and we've had this debate in the show now for about a week. How important does Trey Hendrickson, and I know when you do your grades, you're just grading what happens in the draft. You're not looking at the external factors probably. But when you look at Trey Hendrickson and how uncertain that situation is, let's say the Bengals get a deal done, does that drastically enhance what the Bengals did this draft or not really?
No, I kind of try to, outside of the quarterback position, I try to extract that and make it just strictly like, hey, here's the future. Because again, outside, even if they get a deal done, Trey Hendrickson, is up there in age. You don't know what his production is going to be in 2 years or 3 years from now, and then injuries on top of that. So it's more of like, hey, what's this class going to do for you over the next 4 to 5 years on the length of their rookie contract. So the Hendrickson deal is not a huge factor into this. It's like that team fit, team need thing is not really factored in here outside of the quarterback position. So that would be more of a subjective viewpoint from my end.
My last question for you. Out of all the falls in the draft, Shador Sanders fell, God knows, to 144. You have Mike Green falling later than people thought. Out of all the falls in the 2025 draft, who do you think is going to be the regret player? Who's going to come out, play their ass off, and make a statement in the NFL and make whatever X amount of teams regret not taking them when they were supposed to be taken?
Yeah, I'd have to go with Will Johnson because like obviously there's a knee injury and there was the report. I can't remember who reported it, that it was like the second contract is what people were worried about, or teams were worried about with Johnson and his knee. Like if he's fully healthy, this guy was a top 10 pick. Going into this draft process, you could even argue maybe that he was going to be at a top 5 pick. So if he's able to be healthy. I don't know about his long-term output there because there's some worries there. I think he's a player that, I think he has the benefit of being a cornerback who's not 100% relying on his athletic ability. He's not like a super freak in that way. He's very good with, a ball hawk, if you will, which will help his value. I don't want to say like Diggs from the Cowboys, but similar in that, like, he's not solely like, hey, once my legs go, I'm totally cooked there. So I'll go with Will Johnson. Just, I think his fall wasn't a character issue, which, maybe comes into like a work ethic and things like that. I'm trying to stay away from that. If he's healthy, I think Will Johnson will be the guy that people are like, wow, I think we let him slip a little bit too far.
Austin Mock with The Athletic. Awesome enough to give us some time. Last thing on the way out, Austin, obviously the Steelers go the route of taking Will Howard, quarterback, obviously out of Ohio State. A lot of big Buckeye fans here on this show, of course, and keeping an eye on Will Howard, of course, with Bengals fans not really liking Pittsburgh at all. Now we have to, of course, cheer for a Buckeye on Pittsburgh. What's the likelihood that Will Howard turns into a franchise caliber quarterback? What was your evaluation of Will Howard in this draft and the value that the Steelers got with him?
Yeah, I think it's fine for where they, pick 185. I think that's a fine value for him. I saw some pretty split opinions. He creeped into some people's big boards that as a top maybe 100 player, but I think he was more, in that 150 range. So I just don't know if it's really hard for me to get behind quarterbacks who don't have either the elite athleticism or the elite arm and all these things. Will Howard's just I think good across the board, just doesn't have the wow traits, and obviously that's why he fell. So I'd say it's probably pretty low, but what's interesting is he's going to get a chance. Now obviously they could sign Aaron Rodgers, who knows what's going on with that, but he's going to get a chance to show his worth there, because unless the Steelers are really bad, which somehow they never find a way to have a losing season, they're not going to have a good draft pick to draft a franchise quarterback over him. So he's going to have probably a year or two here to prove himself. So he'll have the chance. I just, if hopefully they can build up I guess it's hopefully if you're an Ohio State fan perspective, not a Browns or Bengals fan here, but if they build up the personnel, if they build up the personnel around him, then I think that's what he needs to be. He's not going to, I don't see him as a guy who's elevating the rest of his, offensive personnel, which I think that's what you want in a franchise quarterback. So, small chance there, but he's going to have every opportunity to do it over the next probably year or two in Pittsburgh.
All right, good stuff. Austin Mock with The Athletic. Awesome enough to give us some time. Austin, appreciate you. Where can our viewers and listeners find your work?
Yeah, I'm over at The Athletic. AMOC419 is my social media on all platforms. I am on all of them. So if you ever have anything, my DMs are open. Reach out to me, and I'll gladly talk some ball with you. So.
All right, good stuff. Austin, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Thank
Have a
you.
good one.
You too.